Left out for pastor appreciation. So Chuck's not the only one. It's part of the gift.
Well, thank you
Not
very
his
much.
gifts, so, but it is on behalf of the whole congregation.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you. I know Danita does too.
I do love you.
Really do. Somebody left me a coffee mug a few weeks ago. I don't remember. It said something about donuts on it, so I know it had to be good. I can't remember the exact saying. It's in my car and it's not with me today. And I got another gift this morning. Oh, I got a donut from somebody. So, like I said, somebody prayed today. So and a gift certificate to one of our favorite eating places. And I got this, so the next time y'all get quiet on me. Oh, that
Is it on?
No, what? There it is.
Amen, Brother Bo.
When it gets too quiet, I'm just gonna hit the button. Just hit that button, and we'll get some amens going.
We're all sorry we didn't give you that.
Y'all all did.
Oh, me. I made a couple errors on here I need to straighten out. Nothing major. I'll do it as we go through it. I got some things out of place, but I'll get to that later. Well, we're talking about our good friend Gideon. And I know you may be getting tired of Gideon, but don't, because that's where the church in America is. I know several have started talking about Nehemiah, and I understand that. I think the emphasis on Nehemiah is coming. But before you can rebuild something, you got to tear it down. And Gideon's about tearing some things down that need to go. Because we individually all have our Midianite. The nation has its Midianites. The church in America has its Midianites. And if you're not familiar with that, Midianite, by that I mean the Midianites did not try to occupy Israel. They only wanted to rob them. They knew they couldn't occupy them. They were a nomadic group. They didn't have a political structure that could come in and take over. So they would just sweep through every year at harvest time and haul off everything. And so it's kind of like, if we related that to people today, it would be like someone who's worked really hard, maybe farming or working on a job, and they're expecting this big bonus to come in, and when it comes in, boom, something happens and it's all taken away. And that's the way the Midianites worked. They were what I would call a pestering enemy, because they were just constantly nitpicking at especially the countrymen of Gideon who lived in the area of Manasseh, which was up here in northern Israel. And I'll show you in a minute where that is and why they went up there. But Gideon, as you remember, has been through this long personal journey of having to let go of what he's believed to be true about himself all of his life, that he was nothing, he was a nobody, he was the least of the least of the least, and he learned that from somebody. Somebody told him that, or maybe several somebody's told him that over the years, and he believed it. But then the angel shows up, and the angel says, "You're a mighty warrior." Well, somebody's wrong. And I'm going to go with what he believed was wrong, because God saw something in Gideon that Gideon didn't see, even though it was there. And a lot of times that's what we encounter with God is, we kind of go through life, and honestly, we kind of approach life based on the presuppositions or beliefs we've been taught about ourselves, about God, what's the nature of God, what's the nature of other people, what's life all about, how does life really work, and all these things. And we get all these little messages that we've learned over the years, and many times if we learn them early, they become almost set in stone and become automatic, so that when we're faced with some type of situation related to that belief, it automatically goes into effect. So, for example, you may believe I'm always a failure, I've always failed. Mama said I never amount. Well, Mama usually won't. Daddy might have said I will never amount to that. And Mama's usually everybody's last teenager, cheerleader. So if Mama gives up on you, it's pretty bad. But you know, Daddy might have said you're nobody, you'll never amount to nothing. And every time some kind of opportunity comes up and that's going to involve risk, instead of saying, well, I can do this, what do they hear? They hear their daddy's word saying, you're a loser, you'll never amount to nothing, you're going to always be a zero. And so what happens then is they back off and let the opportunity pass and go to someone else. So that was Gideon. Here he is hiding from the Midianites when we first introduced to him, and threshing out a little bit of wheat that he's found somewhere in a wine press. And we said that's not the place where you want to thresh wheat, because when they're threshing wheat, they have to throw it up in the air so the air will separate the wheat and the chaff. Well, you can't do that in a wine press because there was a cover over it and you're down in a hole. And so you're not getting a whole lot of wind through there. And so that's where the angel meets him and gives him that first charge to step up, be the mighty man that's in him, let that mighty man come out. And we've gone through the chapters of all the times where God would do supernatural things to confirm what he had told Gideon, and Gideon still didn't believe it. Now that's entrenched belief. And see, sometimes that's the thing that holds us back and may be holding other people back that you're working with, because you see in them great potential to do something, but what they see is just another opportunity to fail and be disappointed. And so it's just like it's almost set in stone. Well, and even God couldn't check. Well, what does God do? We looked at this a couple of weeks ago. He tells him, if you're still afraid, now this is on the eve of the battle. If you're still afraid, go down to the enemy camp and listen to what they're saying. So he goes down to the enemy camp and he hears how they're afraid of him. And that's what finally snaps him out. So it's interesting sometimes that God can't snap us out of it. He has to let us hear what the enemy's doing or saying to snap us out of our delusions, because that's what he was operating under, was the delusion. All right, well, last week they got assembled. He told them, here's your sword, here's your trumpet, here's your torch. Encircle the people. When I tell you, break open the torches, sound the trumpets. They did it, and when they did, it threw the Midianites into confusion. They started killing each other, and because they assumed, since the custom back then was only leaders controlled the torches and the trumpets, that they see all these lights suddenly light up around them. They say, uh-oh, we're in trouble. They didn't know it was only 300 people. They thought it was an army of thousands. So that's when the confusion breaks out, and that's where we left it last week. All right, this week we're going to be in Judges 7, beginning in verse 22. And when the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with the swords. And the army fled to Beth Shittith, you got to be careful saying that name, towards Zariah, as far as the border of Abel Meholah, near Tabbath. Why they can't say near Delville, near Enterprise, I don't know. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, also Zebulun, but they weren't included here, were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them, as far as Beth Barah. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they seized the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth Buron. They also captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb. Remember, there were four kings, so they captured 2 of them. And they killed Oreb on the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was by the Jordan. Now the Ephraimites, this is chapter 8. Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, "Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they challenged him vigorously. The word vigorously means it was a heated argument, in his face, nose to nose. "Why didn't you call us? Why did you leave us out of this?" But he answered, verse 2, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" At this, their resentment against him subsided. Now, I want to do 2 things today. This kind of going with the unfolding narrative of trying to pull out of his story things that can help us when we're fighting our Midianites. Does everyone here have a Midianite?
Yes.
Yeah, we all do. We've got that something. That's something in our life that's a pestering enemy that is constantly picking at us, constantly knocking on the door. It's what Paul referred to as that sin that so easily besets us. Not all sin easily besets us, but there's going to be that one Midianite. And so we all have our Midianites, and we're in the process of trying to break free from these things, because I can tell you cannot make peace with a Midianite. Just like people can't, I've never seen a lot of people trying to be nice to the devil these days.
Amen.
You know, "Oh, I don't want to offend you. Oh, Mr. Devil, if you would please, leave me alone. And, or if you'll just back off, I'll back off. I won't be a threat to you. You don't be a threat to me, and we'll get along fine." And Satan doesn't understand that kind of language. He's not here to do that. Now, let me follow that up with this too, because sometimes this kind of gets lost in translation. Satan's primary mission today is not to wreak havoc in our lives. That's great. His primary mission today is to keep the kingdom of God from becoming in the earth what God said it's going to be. It's to have a church that Jesus said is going to stand against and overcome the gates of hell. It's to have that church defeated and being overcome by the gates of hell. That's his agenda. Satan does not care if we can't pay our light bill. Okay? Now, I say that because sometimes I've heard people, "Oh, the devil's in my checkbook again. Oh, I got checks bouncing on." Well, the devil didn't write those checks. Okay? But I know it's more fun to blame him. But I can tell you that he can't be everywhere at one time. So he has to be strategic. His mission is to stop the church. So is he going to be working at that level or down here causing me to bounce checks so I can't pay my light bill? You see how silly that sounds when you put it into a perspective that's right? But it's more fun to just say, "Oh, that devil, he's doing this to me." Most of the time, it's us doing it to us. It's just easier to blame him. And he gets blamed for a lot of things he doesn't do. He does enough bad stuff he ought to be blamed for. But some of the stuff we blame him for, he's not involved in. It's our own Midianite. It's one that we created. So let me straighten out my mouth, and then I'm going to go where we're going today. Manasseh is basically right here. If you remember, Manasseh was the tribe that when they were first coming into Canaan, asked if they could stay on the eastern side of the Jordan. And so half of them roughly stayed over here, and half of them came over here. And that was their region. Now below them is Ephraim. I think that's right, but it's not spelled right. Don't worry about it. All right, and then he mentions in the part we read today that he sent out word to 3 of his tribes to send men to fight. Now the 3 tribes he sent word to were Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. All 3 of them are up here in the north. Okay, so he sends word to them for help, and they respond along with his countrymen. And so they engage the Midianites around in here. Is that clear? All right. They engage the Midianites around here, and this is where the Midianites go on retreat. And so their plan, this is the hill country, by the way. Their plan was, there's a road, merchant route that runs through there, and their plan was to follow that, to go back down here to where they came from. Everybody see?
To the Red Sea?
Dead Sea.
Dead Sea.
Yeah, that's the Dead Sea.
Like Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah, it's that northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. They were actually related to the Jews. Distant, but they were related through one of Abraham's wives was they were the descendants of her. All right, so you've got Manasseh here, Gideon's here. He appeals to them for help, but he doesn't appeal to Ephraim for help. Now, Ephraim was a stronger tribe and had more people. Also had more experience in battle. But he ignored them. Now, why is the question? And that's what we're getting to today, because I'm going to do something today I don't normally do. I'm going to speculate. So if you and I'm speculating because the Bible doesn't say it. It gives us hints, but it doesn't just come flat out and say it. But it would make sense if the Midianites are causing trouble up here for him to include them in this too. But he didn't. All right, so the point is, and this is where all this is going, when we're in this process of driving the Midianites out of our lives, there's going to come times that we're going to have to deal with people. And there's 2 scenarios I want to point out, one of which we're going to look at today. The next one we'll look at next week. But one of the scenarios is sometimes God is going to require us to seek help from people we don't like. People we have a bias against. And we may not even know why we have a bias against them, but we do. Because Mom and Daddy told us we ought to. It's kind of like the Andy Griffith episode where the 2 feuding families have been feuding for generations. Andy said, well, why? Just because we are. But what caused it? I don't know, but we are. And he kept going back, well, what caused them to start? Because they were that family. Well, what caused you to want to shoot that family? Because they're that family, we're feuding. And there wasn't a reason. They had just been feuding for over a century for no reason. But they had that bias. And sometimes we inherit biases from people, and we really don't have any personal experience with this person, but because somebody said, you can't trust him. Oh, you better be careful around so-and-so. Oh, man, I do. And so we don't know, but it's easy to clamp onto something like that and say, well, maybe they know and I just don't. So God's going to see to it many times that in our process are driving the Midianite out of our lives, that we're going to have to seek help from people we don't like. People we have a bias against. People that maybe we think we're better than. The second one, the one that we'll deal with next week, is that sometimes we'll seek help from someone we believe who will help us, but they don't. Both of those have a way of scandalizing a person. Because on the one hand, that first group, someone's things are getting it together and they feel like they got the enemy on the run, but they just can't quite close the deal. And God said, tell you what, go down the street and go talk to so-and-so. I'm not talking to them. I would never talk to them. Well, you're not going to defeat the enemy. Yeah, but they're whatever. You know, sometimes, I know this is hard to believe, but sometimes if we will just listen to people who maybe we don't agree with, they'll give us a perspective that we haven't seen and some wisdom, that because they're coming from a totally different background, that they see that we don't. And so it's in those times we have to decide, do I want to be free or do I want to be right?
Bo, can you give us some examples?
Of being free or right?
No, of seeking examples, seeking help or opinions of people that you would normally disagree with.
Okay. Well, you may come from a background that says, you can't trust this group of people. They're untrustworthy. I mean, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, they'll rob you blind, they'll do all this other stuff. And God says, I tell you what you're going to do. You're going to go over there to this person. You're going to sit down and you're going to listen to their wisdom about your situation. You say, oh, I'll never do that. Well, you won't get free. I'll give you an example of Bob Mumford shared a friend of his who was missionary in one of the Muslim nations. And he got over there and was having no success whatsoever. And he was praying about going home. And he said, Lord, what do you want me to do? You want me to go home? And so the Lord said, you don't love these people. And he said, what do you mean I don't love these people? I'm over here